Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you for making time to join this session. The topic of which is good practice for partnering with local tech companies, where we hope to be discussing different approaches and insights to building partnerships with local innovators and technology leaders. I'm Dauda Suleiman Dauda. I'm the country director for the USAID funded DataFi project in Nigeria. We have 4 panelists that will be leading this discussion. And I think at this point, I'll just allow each of them to introduce themselves one by one. Jamie, go ahead.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Jamie Arkin. I am the Director of Partnerships and Development at iFluence. I'm calling in from Nairobi, Kenya, and a little bit about what iFluence does is iFluence is a tech company, and we use AI to find people on social media, and what we do in my division called iFluence Reach is utilize those people and work with them to build social media influencer campaigns for awareness and social behavior change. Good to meet everyone and looking forward to the session today.
Thank you. Chris?
Sure, thanks, Dauda. My name is Chris Hoffman and I'm the Managing Director at Humanity Link. Humanity Link is an organization that brings corporate entities into the humanitarian sector and helps to foster meaningful partnerships with both IOs, international organizations, and NGOs. And that predominantly sits within the tech sector, so bringing in digital solutions or digital products that can work in the humanitarian action settings and be able to really foster greater impact and greater scale as you take your programs forward. So thanks a lot, Dauda, and nice to see you, everybody.
Thank you. Steve?
Thanks a lot, Dauda. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephen Onye. I'm calling in from Nairobi, Kenya. I'm the Chief Executive Officer and the founder for Intellisoft Consulting Limited. So Intellisoft is a digital health development company based out of Nairobi, been around for the last 15 years. We primarily work in the public health sector, working with the Ministry of Health and the development partners to build digital health solutions that are sustainable and that align with the principles for digital development. Really happy to be here today and looking forward to exciting conversations ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Cornelius?
Absolutely. Good morning from Boston. As mentioned, I am Cornelius, and at ID 2020, I lead all efforts to implement good digital ID programs. ID 2020 is a public-private partnership whose membership runs the gamut from tech companies to nonprofits to governments and privacy advocacy groups, all of many different sizes. Our mission is to improve the lives of everyone through user-managed, persistent, portable, and privacy-protecting digital identities. And we primarily realize this aim through market shaping with all technical requirements and certification, advocating for a good ID approach with policymakers, and supporting select digital ID programs. And it is in this programmatic support that we encounter this opportunity and challenge of partnering with local innovators and technology providers. And we're excited to join our panelists in such an interesting topic.
Thank you very much. So you've just met our 4 panelists, and the format that this session will be taking is we would invite each of the panelists to give us a brief presentation of their experiences on the topic, and then we will open the floor for questions. But before we do that, we will start with finding out who's in our audience, and for which we have a poll that we would ask that participants kindly take. So that's, I think it's on the screens right now. If you could just kindly let us know who you are, where you're from. Thank you. Great. People are still falling. Okay. 31 people. Okay, looks like we have a sizable proportion of our audience coming from INGOs and multilateral agencies. I think at this point we can safely start to proceed. So I will call on Jamie from iFluence Kenya to present.
Sure. Well, I think, from my perspective, some of the key things that we were thinking about when we had our original conversation was really about how we define local partnerships and who we consider a local partner. One of the key components that I've been thinking a lot about, I transitioned from a global tech company to a Kenyan tech company, and looking at USAID regulations on what they define as local versus PEPFAR versus UN versus an entire movement to support private sector in the global South. Everybody has a little bit of a different definition. And so I think one of the things that's really curious and interesting is understanding how we all come to the table and what's the ultimate goal. Is it to build up the tech industry as well as the institutions that are based in the global South? And does it matter if they're from a specific country? So for example, USAID defines a local partner as any organization with more than 50% of the country leadership and ownership of the company to be from a USAID country. Does that make iFluence, which meets maybe those standards in Kenya, does that make us a local partner when we're working in Uganda? Or not, because we're not registered for Uganda, but we're still in a USAID country? Again, also, I think a big goal is to see that companies like this, grow, that they become global players. But then what about when we take on investment? What about when we have equity that's owned by investors from the global North, Middle East, Asia? Do we then price ourselves out or cost ourselves out of being considered local, even if we're still struggling to make ends meet and prove ourselves? And so I think this is a really interesting issue that I've been thinking a lot about since making this transition from global to local. Just one of the things I wanted to bring up.
Thank you, Jamie. Chris, you want to?
Sure, thanks, Dauda, and thanks, Jamie, as well. For me, I started Humanity Link a few years ago after being 20 years in the humanitarian sector as a responder and as a leader in the space. And what I realized was that partnerships were not only sustainable, but they were not fruitful for anyone. And so I kind of came up with four major pieces to creating local partnerships that I work with the organizations through. And the first one is understanding your needs. Are you developing something that is just for you and for your organization? Or actually, are you looking at developing a product, something that you could either sell as an organization, or it has the opportunity to scale within your organization and outside your organization for other ones to use? So that's number one for me. Number two is I always encourage the people that I work with to form partnerships, not procurement processes. One of the biggest issues we deal with in the humanitarian sector is that everything is focused on procurement, 3 quotations to get you a service provider. It doesn't really foster that opportunity for partnerships. And the reason why we need to foster that, especially within technology, is because of point number 3 that I want to make, which is around funding and IPs. So as we develop tech solutions and as tech solutions grow in the humanitarian sector and as we use them, IP becomes developed. And as organizations, as humanitarian organizations or development organizations, our ability to manage IP sometimes is difficult. So what's great about forming a partnership is you can co-own or you can co-proliferate different IP opportunities that can go either into the open source space or stay proprietary. But the idea is that you can share the profits and the income that could potentially come from those. The last piece that I want to talk about when it comes to local partnerships and what we really encourage our partners to do is to understand that there could be multi-tiered partnerships. You could be developing code on a platform from a global provider. And at the same time, though, you use developers from a local tech company that are really in tune with what that platform does. So there's an opportunity as you keep growing these partnerships and you keep looking to engage locally. You don't have to do everything locally. You might be able to just do part of the process locally that will still foster capacity, will still foster income generation, and will still grow your product to actually enhance the impact that you're trying to create. You know, for us, it has been very, very special to be able to work with both local organizations and international organizations to see how they react, to see how they're adapting to this. And we've got a lot of great success stories that have come from this. Just recently, with one of the largest NGOs in the world, we were able to develop IP that has now moved into the open source space, where they still, you know, are able to govern that open source code, but that they were able to take this and use it actually as a co-funding mechanism for receiving more funds. So the IP itself became the co-funding opportunity for the NGO as they went to seek other funds to scale that technological solution. So in truth, I think there are a lot of different ways we need to look at this. I think there's a lot of different opportunities that we need to engage in and not just think about procurement. I can't say that enough, that we need to work our way out of the procurement mentality and work our way into the partnership mentality. Thanks a lot, Dauda.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I think I probably forgot to mention that as you're listening to our panelists, if you have any questions, you can just post them in the chat box, and then if possible, you could let us know whom you're directing the question to, if it's specific to someone, and then we'll have them address these later. Thank you. So at this point, I think we'll proceed with Steve.
Thanks a lot, Dauda. I mean, I think Jamie and Chris have laid out the ground really well. And I think my experience with this topic is based on my own personal experience, where I've worked for international NGOs for a long time, you know, just the usual funding space, the development space that most of us have worked in. And I think, as Chris mentioned, and I really like Chris's, the way he's laid it out from procurement to partnerships. And I think primarily what people, I think, call partnerships have really just been procurement mechanisms. You know, I think, you know, US government, for example, sends out, you know, has different procurement mechanisms that essentially end up purchasing services and all that from local tech organizations. And you know, this happens typically when people are responding to RFPs, and these international NGOs or foreign organizations then look for sub-partners in country, provide them, you know, a scope of work and funding and all that, and they're restricted to what they can do. And I think over time, the word partnership has been misused in that context, whereas it's really just procurement, you know, because after the period is done, you're done, you know, and you move on to the next consortium. Hope that you can put together a very good proposal and win a lot of funding for another 5-year period. But I really like what Chris mentioned, that, you know, we need to change the paradigm completely to partnerships. And I think for me, that starts with establishing models for partnerships that are really transparent, clear, and have very, you know, very objective standards, you know, so that we can determine what's really of interest to me. For example, as Intellisoft, if I'm going to partner with USAID or some other organization in the US or Europe, wherever it is, it needs to be very clear. It needs to be on even ground, that this is what I'm bringing in, you know, matters to do with IP and all that, things that are typically swept under the carpet. I think all that needs to be discussed very transparently, but by using a very clear partnership model. And I think that's one. Then obviously, secondly, I think if you're talking about how do you find these organizations, I mean, evidently, you know, in most of the countries that are fairly underdeveloped, maybe the systems aren't very mature in terms of providing objective profile of these tech organizations. So, you know, you really can't go to one place and say, you know, Intellisoft, you've been operating for last 15 years. This is your profile in terms of, are you an accountable organization, ethical, you know, in your performance and all. It's really self-reported. So, I mean, I think it's important to find something that is authoritative, whether it's peer-driven or community-driven or even government-driven, that lists out these sort of organizations. And I'm happy that USAID, if I'm not wrong, has started an initiative called the New Partner Initiative, where you can list out, your organization, self-reported, profile yourself, almost like a marketplace. But I think that needs to go further in terms of then connecting with the government, like let's say government of Kenya, to ensure that that is available. Now, luckily in Kenya, Ministry of ICT and through the ICT Authority, they actually have a certification process where you can apply and you get listed as, to basically verify your claim that you're a good organization. Yeah, I mean, I think besides that, it's really just emphasizing what Chris mentioned, that there needs to be a huge paradigm shift in terms of language, but followed through with actionable things that are implementable, like standards and models, to make sure that, I'm coming in with a lot of strength, a lot of things that I can offer. And I need a space where I can actually argue my case, negotiate equally and transparently, and without being made to feel that just because you're from LMIC, then you take what you get. Thanks, Dauda.
Thank you very much, Steve. I think we'll move on to Cornelius before we start taking on the questions.
Thanks, Donna. And I actually think Steve and Chris already did a lot of my job for me, so I'll keep it brief. I think my first point is that local partnership and sort of, so what Steve and Chris mentioned should be more than simply checking a box. It needs to be more than sort of stating usability testing or translations. We need to have local partners contributing meaningfully to core components of the solution. Now, in digital ID, particularly our approach to digital ID, we tend to work with sort of cutting edge technologies, infant biometrics and distributed ledgers and decentralized storage and sort of blockchain wallets. And so it is very difficult when we have a program, and sort of generally referencing our digital health ID program in Bangladesh, to find someone locally, and by that I mean in country or at least in region, who can provide the complete solution. That's just generally not an option for us. And so as Chris and Steve mentioned, the next step is to try and find a partnership between an international solution provider and a local provider. And I think really the devil's in the details about how you have a meaningful partnership between these two entities and ensuring that the local provider not only is working on core components of the solution, but that there are concerted efforts, either informational materials or workshops, where we have the specialist technical teams at the international solution provider helping to transfer some of that knowledge to the local teams. Again, sort of building on Steve and Chris, it really comes down to the partnership model and how we ensure that they remain engaged at all stages of the development process. And that they're involved in things like the IP discussions, ownership of the solution. When I speak to our local government partners, they're very, very insistent that having a local tech provider on board is critical for the long-term sustainability of the program, because they're providing tier 1, 2, 3 support to the government, who are ultimately sort of owning the solution in the long term. I'm going to stop there because I think Jamie, Chris, and Steve covered a lot of the other issues, and hopefully give some more time back for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Cornelius, and everyone else for the contributions. I think some questions have already started coming in. The very first one being from Rowena, who says that a big challenge for international NGOs who want to work with local tech companies is the challenge of just finding these local companies. So she wanted to know what guidance do you have for large international NGOs on how to find and recognize top talent in local tech companies? I believe Jamie wanted to take on that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I know that there was another question in the chat that talked about kind of these marketplaces, and was mentioned that USAID had set one up under their new partnerships initiative. I find those not so helpful, to be honest. I've registered on every single one of them throughout this career, my previous job. Guess how many people have ever reached out to me for a solution? Just many. Never happened. I'm the first thing I do in the job, sign up on, I wrote down, there's one for USA, the new one that they've launched. ICT4D had a list that said you can get up to $2 billion of USAID funding. Nothing's come from that. I know Gavi's building one, and then the Response Innovation Lab also has one. They're there. So if you are interested in finding local partners, I know that Response Innovation Lab, which is housed under a consortium of 5 INGOs, including Save the Children, CARE, World Vision, someone else, sorry, Response Innovation Lab's team. But I know that they have an office in Kenya, or they've got staff in Kenya, Uganda, I believe somebody in Asia. They are really active in curating that list and really working with partners. I don't know how active the other ones really are. But for me, it's networking, right? I know who I am, but I also could tell you who's doing kick-ass stuff in Kenya and South Africa and Uganda, because a lot of us are recognizing that as tech companies in Africa or in the development sector, we're not trying to be Google, we're not trying to be Microsoft, we're not going to fix all your problems. So iFluence that I work for, we do AI, but we do it for a very specific thing. We do it for social behavior change. If you said, I have this data set and I want to understand XYZ, I'd give you the phone number of a guy I know in South Africa, Kieran, who might be able to help you. And then if he can't help you, he'll know somebody else. And so there is a really good network, I think, of people who are active in the sector, who know other people that can solve some of the problems and recommend them. And if you think about the tech sector in the for-profit space, you know, all of these startups that are getting all the seed funding, I mean, we're all going to the same conferences and we're talking to the same investors, and sometimes our investors are also, you know, have investments in multiple companies as well, and so there's some credibility that can be shared in that space too, and so, you know, I think I saw another question that also said, you know, how do you find the big INGOs? I LinkedIn it, I stalk USAID procurements, and I go on DevEx, and I know my list because I also had to come from a development background and figure out how to make the development sector care about my tech, care about partnering with little old, you know, company X, Y, or Z. And so it is a matchmaking process, but for sure, if you're struggling, do reach out to anybody in the space and see what types of networks they have. I don't know if anybody else has recommendations.
Jamie, you know, one big one for me is around the different co-working spaces and startup spaces. You know, we know that Nairobi has quite a few around where tech companies are able to sit together. But I did some research not long ago on the continent of Africa. And, you know, we were finding 2 to 3 on average in every country throughout the continent. And once you start engaging in these innovation hubs and these startup hubs, you also see that they're also looking to engage with others because they need help with their tech. So that's another great place to start. So again, coming out of our NGO offices, coming out of our IO offices and getting in the tech offices, right? It's not about them coming to us. We need to go to them. And so those places where they sit, those places where they hang out is also really important. So it's also a social change within the NGO sector that do not wait. Again, that procurement mindset, don't wait for them to apply for you to offer a procurement. Go out to them and go see what they're doing, go listen to what they're doing, and try and see and think to yourself, well, does that fit for my work? Could that enhance the things that I'm doing? You know, we are always in a wait and see mode as NGOs, and it's always better to flip that around. So completely agree with you, Jamie, on the networking thing, because I think I know the same Kieran in South Africa. So you know how our network will work, right? So, you know, we say that name, we say, oh, you know, Cornelius is working in Bangladesh. Oh, I know Cornelius. He also works with so-and-so. And we can really build it that way too. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. And you know, some of these countries don't have a whole lot of options. And so we definitely get to know each other. And yeah, I'm like, okay, I know my one person in Bangladesh, and yeah, you're all kind of 1 degree of separation.
Right. Stephen, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think as someone mentioned, and Chris and Jamie have alluded to this, but I think for me, and to answer Rowena's question, I mean, I think the easiest place to find people without too much advertising is a community of practice. I mean, so if, for example, you're looking for a tech company that builds electronic medical record systems, you probably want to go to a community like OpenMRS, so, because there it's a community earned badge and reputation. If I claim that that my company builds fantastic EMR systems based on OpenMRS, then you'd expect that I'm part of that community where my peers know me, they know about my work, I contribute back code to the shared code and assets and artifacts. And so that's probably the easiest place to find, because marketing in such communities is really dependent on what you're offering, right? And it's very open. Yeah, so I would definitely encourage that to Rowena.
Can I kind of go on a tangent that some of the introductions had thought made me think about, but in terms of kind of this local tech partnership, there's two levels of it. And it also sort of reminds me of this private sector partnership idea that sometimes gets put forward. And there's two types of partnerships that happen in both of those instances. The first is where the tech company, actually, you're waiting for them to give you money, right? Or the private sector, you're hoping that they're going to give you a deal. So not to throw shade, but Safaricom is on every list of local partnerships. Safaricom is not the same as a tech company that's local. We don't, the rest of us are your procurement. You're trying to get something out of them, a good deal on airtime, a reach to their network, whereas the rest of us pretty much are out here just trying to help you build something for your solution. And so I think that it's also really important to recognize that when you're looking for these partnerships, and I think what Chris probably spends a lot of time trying to figure out with INGO partners is, what type of tech partnership are you looking for? Do you need something from someone, or are you going to contract someone for something? And that's where we get into this kind of procurement versus partnership relationship, because the number of times that I've been brought into a panel about private sector partnership, but really what you're asking for is like, some sort of discount on services or access to something, or relationships about, tech, but really, again, same story versus, figuring out how you're investing in a company that's in the country that's going to create solutions. I think that's critical.
One thing I would add, and I sort of completely agree with the need to move beyond procurement to partnership, is that everything is done sort of by networks, by who you know and by reaching out to them. What we try and also do is keep open requests for proposals for projects, because it is important to give fair opportunity to people who perhaps aren't in your network for one reason or another, to apply, to share the great stuff they're doing, to share a little bit about their work. And so it feels like sort of a holdover of procurement, but these sort of open requests for proposals are a way of ensuring that people who perhaps for some reason or another aren't in your network still aren't excluded because of it. And I think along those lines, one thing we've been trying to be very good at is, I don't know, I'm sure a lot of people listening have responded to requests for proposals. They can be brutal. And so trying to minimize the burden that you place, particularly on small organizations, which don't have teams, explicitly to draft these requests for proposals is critical. That there's at least in the first stage of selection or shortlisting, that it's relatively low barriers, so that smaller organizations can get involved, can share some of the cool things they're working on, even if they're not in your network. But sort of to Chris and Jamie's point, a lot of the time this is done through reaching out to people and saying, who do you know in the space? Or even, taking this open request for proposal method, we'll even reach out to them and say, can you push this out to your networks if you're not involved? And so it is important to continue building your networks. But for an INGO, I think it is equally helpful to look at your internal processes for if you're thinking it from sort of a procurement request for proposal angle, and think, where can I strip this away that's unnecessary and it's just serving as a barrier to potentially innovative, smaller local tech providers?
Dauda, can I make a comment as well? Because I love what you've just said, Cornelius, and Jamie, what you said, and then Jeff in the chat just put something up that I was going to comment on anyway, which is the idea of support. So one of the issues with tech solutions is sustainable support for that tech solution, right? And NGOs and IOs tend to have a big issue with wanting to build the capacity for the tech support in their in-house. Right. And I think that has been a mentality over a long period of time that has kind of created these burgeoning NGOs that have all of this capacity. But then when the tech grows, that capacity is not growing with it. And so that support mechanism is offered in the market. Why are NGOs not taking those support opportunities from the market? So again, as you develop these partnerships, and when I say developing partnerships, to build on what you've said, Cornelius, some of the partners that I've worked with, we've actually co-designed projects with corporate partners and NGOs to service a need that they've identified in a country. And we've gone to the donors, not on a request for proposals, but with an unsolicited proposal saying, we've got a great partnership with a great product that works for the needs that you're trying to address. We think you should fund us, not waiting for them to say, we will fund, an opportunity here, because we know that we've created a very strong partnership that if we hadn't, it would have taken another 6 months to do if we had to wait for the call for proposals to see what they wanted us to provide. So this, again, this paradigm shift, not, if I'm seeking Series A funding as a startup, I'm not waiting for somebody to say, I've got Series A funding, come and ask me. I'm going to that investor. Why are we not going to the donor, showing them the need, showing them the products that we have, and having them come back to us with funding? And what's great about, back to Jamie's point, the public-private partnership piece is that sometimes these corporates do bring a little bit of that funding with them to influence the donor's opportunity, because they say, look, we've got some co-funding. And, so there are all these different pieces to this puzzle. We need to think more market and less traditional NGO practice. And I think what we'll see is technological solutions. They don't all have to be digital. They could be product related, but these types of solutions have an opportunity to really make a great impact if we think about it differently. And I think that that's really coming out from everybody's comments. But just to kind of synthesize those, to me, it just seems like we're doing it all wrong. And we need to think more like the tech companies do when they're seeking investments. Why do we not seek investments from the donor? Why are we asking them to invest in us? We need to go to them and say, we've got a great investment for you to make. And I think that's a different way of looking at it.
Thank you. So just to kind of start rounding up, I would ask maybe Cornelius or Steve or both, if they could, in a few sentences, let us have their perspective on what are the advantages or benefits of selecting a local partner.
Steve, you want to go first?
Oh, thanks a lot, Cornelius. I think for me, Dauda is three things. I think one is one key benefit is deeper insights and contextual, basically deeper contextual insights and intelligence that you probably will not get very easily if you don't have that partnership with a local organization that obviously knows what they're doing. Then I think for me, secondly, also would be cost effectiveness. I think there's been lots of studies done about costing, total cost of ownership and all those kinds of things. And it's very clear that it's a lot more cost effective in the long run. Then I think for me, thirdly, which it's debatable based on where you're coming from, is this whole issue of sustainability. I think sustainability can be a business model where things are built not to be sustainable based on the way you define them, or they can be built to be sustainable in a way that that it's handed over and it outlives everyone. Thanks, Dauda.
Thank you. Cornelius, you wanted to add to that?
Well, yeah, I think Steve hit all the high notes there. The one thing I would, and this is sort of coming from well, not quite an implementers, but certainly from their angle, is that there is this long-term externality benefit. If, for instance, in a digital health ID in Bangladesh, we were to transfer certain skills, they could use infant biometrics for something else. They could use distributed ledger blockchain technologies for other applications. And so there's, I think, a whole host beyond that sort of constrained project where you get long-term externalities from skill and knowledge transfers to local technical teams, which could be employed for all other host of social initiatives and public goods, etc. Over.
Thank you. So the next question, I think it's at first glance may seem simple, but that's the devil. The devil is in the detail. How do you define local partners, Jamie, Chris?
Well, I think this is what I kind of had touched on before, which is everybody's defining it differently. For me, it's important to think about where are people paying their taxes, or where are the staff really living? Which LLC are you paying into? I know it's crazy, but like, you know, again, look at the whole industry, right? The whole development sector, the whole thing is if you're saying you're partnering locally, that money that you're spending on that local partnership probably should be paying those local taxes, and all the staff paying also those taxes. Not all of them, of course. I mean, look, even you know, a local company should be able to have people all over the world, but that's how it's built, right? Is if we're restricted to only hiring people in one country instead of outsourcing to multiple hubs that have specialties around the world, we'll always be behind the bigger players. But I think that's really important to think about. And that one piece from USAID is that the majority leadership, at least, is from that country that you're working in is a big piece of how I think of that, and that the majority of the staff members as well are paying those local taxes, or in theory, living in that local country. I guess I don't want to look into anybody's tax records personally.
Yeah, so Chris, maybe you have a slightly different perspective on that.
Well, not a different perspective, maybe just a different line, you know, because I think what Jamie is saying is absolutely right. I think my line on it is really not how you define it, but understanding the complexity of it, right? So again, it could be around support. You know, Steve has mentioned other parts around intelligence and sustainability. So how do you make sure that your solution continues to thrive in the local context? So it might not be in the development, but it might be in the support. I'll give a quick example. So we have an international corporate partner that we work with on solutions in 27 different countries. And what we've done is, in the countries that corporate didn't have engagement in, we help them to identify a partner locally that then they contracted and trained to utilize their solution and provide support in that country. So sometimes it's not about, you know, again, we have to think quite widely about how we create local partnerships. So it might be through a corporate partner and creating a sustainable support system or network at the local level that will continue that process onwards. And look, it's a benefit for everyone. Now that global corporate partner has engagement in a country that wasn't part of their current portfolio. B, we've built capacity on a different set of code or a different platform in a country that didn't have it before. And so now as this product continues to grow inside a country that it wasn't actually expected to be in, now we've opened up a whole new market and a whole new opportunity. So I think that it's very important. The second piece that I want to say, just to end this, it is around, again, market-driven mentalities in humanitarian settings. Right? We talk about this a lot, that we want to give cash, for example, in humanitarian settings. But when we give cash in humanitarian settings, whether we do it digitally or filial money, if we do it digitally, can the market accept that? Can the market bring in the products? Can the people spend it? It's not just about partnering for the tech. It's about also partnering for the market. How do you ensure that the market can absorb whatever tech that you're developing as an NGO and then utilize it and help it to grow? Again, always thinking about scalability and the multiple sets of users that you have with tech solutions, because as an NGO, you're a user, but also you have, you know, second and third order effects of utilizing that tech that could actually enhance a market and enhance the opportunity for people to actually become sustainable in their livelihoods, not just out of the cash that you give, but the tech and the growth that comes from that tech that you've been able to provide. So there's a lot of different ways that we can look at this. You know, I think Jamie's are very concrete around how, you know, with RFPs and with these other types of things of how you define it, whereas mine is more around the market side of things and how we can integrate and be, again, open-minded about how we define local partnerships.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
I like a lot of what you said, and I want to spin, and I think it would be value for us to talk about the sustainability component, because I also think that there's this idea that sustainable means no more costs, right? And that it's free. How is your solution sustainable because it's open source and it's just going to exist like Facebook and Gmail, which we all use every day and never have to pay? Isn't that what we're going to get at the end of this? And the answer is absolutely not. But what the sustainability should do is it should be more cost effective than the version without the tech. So if it's a remote training, how much were you spending to do in-person training before the remote training version existed? So the remote training version shouldn't just exist as a website that you never have to touch again. It should be $5 instead of $10 a person, and you still have to spend on it, but you're going to spend less. And then as you know, as Chris mentioned, I just had a really concrete example of that with the humanitarian sector, which is in cash distribution in Uganda, where Airtel could not get the supply chain to do the disbursement that WFP wanted to do, which was like the equivalent of, let's say it was 27,000 shillings. Well, they didn't have the bills, because when they gave people the cash through mobile money, everybody needed to cash out immediately because no one accepted mobile money. But then Airtel didn't have enough vendors with, you know, two 10,000 notes, a 5,000 note, and two, you know, and two 1,000 notes. They couldn't stay liquid because you had 9,000 people asking for 20,000 Ugandan shillings the same afternoon. It was madness. And so immediately MTN was like, not into it. Airtel was like, oh God, this is costing us more than we're making on the transaction. And then my favorite part of this was also when Airtel said, you know, maybe we create some group savings accounts so people could actually invest that money. And they nixed that program 2 years before, and they've forgotten about it because it didn't make them money also. And so it's also important for us to stay in the sector and stick with it, to understand what that sustainability looks like when it's happening, later when someone reintroduces the same idea, you know, and really thinking through so many things, because also sometimes the tech doesn't work. It can't always be the solution. It probably would have been easier if they just did 27,000 shillings in cash, no Airtel in between, doing some sort of money transfer to a SIM card that somebody just pulls out. Like, we really need to think about the whole picture oftentimes.
Jamie, just as you mentioned, that last little sentence that you mentioned, I think is so key and missing for a lot of folks in the humanitarian and development sector, which is understanding the user journey and utilizing those more tech-focused development tools, you know, the soft tools of developing that user journey, human-centered design. We talk about it a lot, but in reality, as we get there, you come out with the tech solution. I think it'd be great to do cash distribution, but by the time you go through the whole journey process, you've realized that it's just about giving cash. Tech, you know, we always need to say it, and I hate to say it and belabor it, but tech is not always the solution, right? And we need to realize that and grasp that. But having that in our knowledge, you know, bank, in our brains, that tech isn't always a solution, then helps us to really hone in on what we can do and what we should develop and what we should invest in, versus having, you know, I'm working with one partner right now that has 7 different apps in one country. So this one NGO has developed 7 different apps in this country. None of the apps are linked together whatsoever. So now they're looking for funding to see how to link all the apps together so that you can go into one central place. But the reality is that that's going to be really tough, and it's not really solutions oriented. And to be able to provide the support to that constantly, version 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, get all the security right constantly, all those things, it's becoming a very, very expensive thing, where actually some of it can be provided without an app. And those that do need an app, let's focus on that and let's really hone in on that and develop a great tool for others. So we always need to be thinking in that way too.
Yeah. So another thing we wanted to look at was the question about finding the right partner for a local or regional project. Cornelius, you touched on the Digital Health IDs project in Bangladesh. How did you go about finding the right partner for that?
I mean, it's a great question. I think we've all sort of semi-touched on it a little bit throughout this conversation. You know, the one method I mentioned earlier, and I would reiterate, is that along with sort of tapping your network, is having some mechanism for enabling sort of open submissions, so that tech providers, particularly local innovative tech providers who are outside of your network for one reason or another, are given the opportunity to apply for that partnership, to demonstrate their capabilities, etc. The other thing, and the other way we have used, and I think it is critical, is that ID 2020 has sort of a unique position in a lot of these projects, but asking your local implementer, someone who has worked on similar projects, sort of Jamie's point, we're not completely reinventing everything. And so the local implementer has worked on similar programs. They've worked with a lot of the local providers, and asking them for recommendations and details about their experience. And sort of the combination of those two is what we used in Bangladesh, to find both, the international solution provider, but also, matchmaking a little bit with the local provider, so that there is this strong partnership. And I think I also mentioned this earlier, is ultimately, the implementing organization, in this case, the government, needs to be comfortable working long-term with this solution provider for technical support. Now they can do a little bit of it in-house, and they can build out their in-house capabilities, but there is this need to have a good working relationship. And so if they're comfortable with certain organizations, that is certainly an asset moving forward. Over.
Thank you. I think we're almost close to time. We have some 15 minutes remaining. So let's quickly move along. The next issue we'll probably be looking at is that of establishing impactful and maintaining sustainable partnerships beyond individual projects. Does anyone have any insights they want to share on this?
I can share a little bit. And it's actually something I think Jamie mentioned earlier, which is around standards, and how coming together and sort of creating standards, particularly for things like interoperability and privacy protection, is a way that helps local providers sort of know what the playing field is. And I'm speaking sort of from an ID 2020 perspective. We're a public-private partnership where a lot of our impact is through an open alliance where anyone can join and contribute to the conversation. So, these standards shouldn't be created by a few big players sitting in a room together, working out the details that work best for them, and then just saying, oh, here it is, have fun. We've created the rules, and now we're going to play the game. And so I think having these open partnerships, and we did something similar for sort of COVID passes with the Good Health Pass Collaborative, is try and make it as big as possible and get as many people from local innovative service providers and technology providers to participate in setting these standards and participating in setting these blueprints, so that when it comes to selecting the solutions, they have at least somewhat of a sort of a leg in a stake in the game in terms of the principles and standards used. Over.
I think the other for me, I would say is it's first and foremost, I think it's really just all of us creating an environment where it's a level playing field and everyone really earns the right to be a partner, so I feel like it should not be dictated based on a couple of things. I mean, I understand obviously that everyone comes with something, right? If you're a huge donor, you've got lots of money and that's your stake, and you need to ensure that you're getting the right partner and all that, right? But I think because the fact that you can't do what I can do because I'm in country, it means that I'm bringing something to the table. and I think what we all need to do is create that environment where let me earn that partnership, because I feel like the point of entry is so important and it determines everything else downstream. And if it's sort of this thing that is controlled, and I'm coming with $1 billion, and so everyone has to play by my rules and all that, then that's not a partnership. So I think that needs to evolve over time, but that really comes from a recognition that I'm not coming empty-handed, and you didn't find me wandering around doing nothing, and now you think that you can just buy me and tell me what to do and all that, then that's not partnership, that's procurement, and that's fine. Some people are happy to do that, and they should. Then I think after that, of course, is partnership like everything else. And I think for me, the best example is, and I keep referencing the open source communities, is open source community developers earn badges based on the work you're contributing. You get recognized by your peers and everyone else, and purely based on your competency. What are you contributing? It doesn't matter what you look like, where you're from. Most people don't even see each other, right? So there's got to be that objectivity around partnership, that it needs to be distilled to the most important components of the model, which is what are you contributing? And then we can build everything else around it in terms of ethics, regulations, laws, and all that. But at the core of it, it needs to be that equitable, transparent, non-discriminatory aspect of what are you contributing to the partnership. And then, then after that, let everything else sort of organically grow out.
Steve, if I can build on that a little bit and add some more. For me, it's also about, as you develop the solution, as you develop these partnerships, that you're not just thinking about the sector itself, right? Because the reality is that as we have these new digital solutions, there's a lot of market value for these solutions outside of the current mindset that you have around the development of that solution, like using medical records, right? And just your sphere of influence. Maybe there are other opportunities for taking those records into schools and using similar activities for teachers in schools, right? And which makes the product that you're developing or that you have developed being able to be integrated with other opportunities in other sectors. And we lose sustainability by always focusing on the development of digital tools for a specific geography and a specific situation, because those situations are going to end, right? Well, hopefully, right? In general, when it comes to humanitarian situations, we're hoping for those situations to end. And so, but what do you do with the product when it's over? Well, you can either transfer it to another country, right? And change the language and contextualize it to that country, which is also well and good. But what does that do for the rest of the country? As you've built this capacity in that country and now that situation's over, what do you do with those tech service providers? Are you able to help them to parlay that into another opportunity? And you have the IP. So as an NGO, your opportunity to actually generate your own income over the IP of the tech solution that you've been able to develop is something very special and something very unique and something that's not done on a regular basis, that has the potential to actually grow income for NGOs. So they don't have to always be seeking funding from others. They can actually have discretionary funds that they can use for new developments and new opportunities that they're trying to do.
Okay, thank you. So probably maybe the last thing that we could discuss here is the issue of evaluating the local tech partnerships. Does anyone have anything to add on how to evaluate local tech partnerships?
I could quickly say, sorry, just really quickly. I think for me is evaluation should be based on standards. Standards should not matter where you're coming from, as long as we all understand that this is the minimum standards for practice, for development and all that, then we should all be evaluated on the same standards. That's my very, very strong opinion. But the moment we start differentiating standards and all that, especially on something like tech, I think there might be some other areas where you could argue, which it's really hard for me to point to those other areas. But I think tech is just one of the things that cuts through all those boundaries that we establish. And so, as long as I know the standards that I should perform to, then evaluate me on those standards like everyone else. Thanks.
Jamie, you wanted to add something?
No, I think Steve nailed it. Cornelius, go ahead. I see you're up here.
I was going to push back a little bit and say, yes, the technology should be sort of assessed on consistent standards. What I will say is that I think in different use cases in different countries, the partnership, like how do you evaluate the strength of the partnership, the performance of the partnership will vary. If you're trying to do something in country X and they just do not have the technical providers at all, or the capabilities for a particular type of technology, your partnership is going to look very different than if you're going into country Y and they have an abundance of providers with the expertise, or you're working on a particular type of solution, which is that the capabilities are more readily available. And so I think when we're not assessing the technology itself, but assessing the partnership, it will vary depending on the application and the location, because I mean, not all countries and not all use cases are equal. And so I think there needs to be some flexibility, at least in maybe not in the metrics, but in the sort of the targets that you set for these things, so that we can adapt and ensure we're doing the best possible approach for that situation. Over.
I guess there's two things, right? Did the tech work? Was it up to standard? Did it meet your expectations? Sometimes it depends, right? As you said, Cornelius, that someone says design an app for farmers in Malawi, and you did it, and there's a 2% smartphone penetration for farmers in Malawi, so nobody downloaded it and nobody used it. Seen this happen, right? So the partner did all the things you asked, but its success, its evaluation was a failure, but not necessarily because the partner didn't do the work. And so you also have two different layers. Is, are you getting your expected results? Which sometimes it's an experiment. We've never tried it before. We don't know if it's going to be sustainable, not sustainable in a cost-wise, but like Ethio Telecom goes down all the time, and you can have a direct line to anybody there, and you have no idea when it's going to go back up. There's nothing you can do about it, you know, but the partners communicating, they're sending reports, they're meeting deliverables. And so, you know, what do we define evaluation of that partnership or the tech itself? And then what does success look like is still malleable. But I agree with Steve, is set the standards, keep the standards for, you know, the parts that you can control.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Cornelius wanted to.
No, I was going to say, I completely agree. I was more referring to like when you have this hybrid international local partnership, where do you draw the line in terms of responsibilities, and what constitutes success? What do they have to do in terms to be considered a successful local partnership? I think will vary a little bit, particularly when you have this sort of international and local hybrid model.
Yeah. So what are the common problems that you've seen in these kinds of relationships?
Well, I think sort of the biggest one, the most obvious one, is sometimes we sort of receive proposals, particularly from international solution providers, where the local partnership component is very much lip service. They have them doing, again, some basic usability testing, maybe some translations, and they think sort of that ticks the box. We have a local partner. So I think, you know, and this is, it's actually a difficult task, being very clear about pushing the boundaries in terms of what the local partner is contributing to, particularly to the core components of the solution, and engaging them on that side, so that they have a bigger stake, and that they're sort of learning through doing more on some of the core technologies, rather than doing some sort of, I would say, lower value add items. Not that they're not important, but that I think we can push that a little bit further than at least some organizations are trying to do. Over.
Okay, thank you very much. We have just about 2 minutes of time remaining. I'm not sure if any of the panelists has anything to add before we round up.
Dauda, just quickly, I just want to say thank you for doing this with us today. It's been great, and to the panel, you guys are awesome. And obviously, we're all joined on LinkedIn, and would encourage everybody that's also, you know, in the audience to seek us all out in LinkedIn and continue the conversation, so that we can really continue to grow our networks. Right? We talked about it at the beginning, and I think it's good to end, or at least be close to ending with that as well. As let's keep the networking going, so we can share our networks to create greater local partnerships.
Absolutely. I would echo Chris and sort of thanking all of you and the panelists for joining us. The one thing I would also add is, moving to this partnership from procurement will require a bit of extra effort and time, and don't be dissuaded by this sort of facing a little bit of sort of an uphill battle in building this partnership. It's worth the upfront investment. But for anyone who's listening, who's interested in sort of feeling a little bit of the difficulties with moving to this partnership approach, it's worthwhile, even if there's a bit of a headache initially.
Steve, Jamie, any last words?
Yeah, I mean, really quickly, I think for me, thanks a lot, Dauda, and my fellow panelists. It's really been great, this discussion. But I think that for me, the parting shot is, I mean, I think partnerships are great, and definitely we should really do everything we can to nurture those and grow them. But I think more importantly is that I think we need a lot more advocacy. We need a lot more evidence for investment and really sustainable business models underpinning partnerships. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and we're at time. So I've dropped my LinkedIn into the chat so everybody can access my account. Thank you guys so much for joining today. Thank you so much for my fellow panelists and hosts. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully we can find partnerships together.
Thank you, Jamie, Chris, Stephen, and Cornelius. And thank you everyone for making time to join us on this panel. Have a great day ahead. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Have a great day.